What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, where you'll find out what the Fukushima's going on.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Monday, April 30th, 2018, end of the month here. Boy, have we got a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, ready to answer the phone, put you on the air with your comments, questions, observations, opinions, and so forth and so on. Obviously, the big story today is a couple of hours ago, Benjamin Netanyahu got on the TV and did this presentation claiming to have obtained half a ton of documents about Iran's nuclear weapons program. And you need to keep in mind, Israel has been screaming that Iran has been building a bomb for 30 years now. For 30 years, Israel has been out there saying Iran is just weeks away from a nuclear bomb. And it hasn't happened yet. And it's important to understand Netanyahu does not actually have proof that Iran actually built a bomb. They're claiming that they were able to steal half a ton of documents from inside this secret warehouse in Iran and bring it on out, and they've copied it. They say the originals are in a secure place, and they're making the copies available to the White House and to the Aiea. And frankly, this reminds me of the laptop of death, which, if you've been following this issue for a long time, there was this laptop that was supposedly stolen from an Iranian nuclear scientist. It was filled with all these documents that looked very incriminating. It was provided to the West by MEK, which was being used as a propaganda laundry, if you will, by Israel. And everybody got upset and said, oh, see, it proves Iran is building a bomb. Iran is building a bomb. And then it turned out when experts looked at the documents, they said, this stuff is all junk. It's nonsense. Somebody went out on the web and did a web search and downloaded a bunch of charts and graphs and blueprints that don't really make any sense. And they put them all on the laptop to try and create this case that Iran was building a nuclear weapon. And this is just more of the same thing. And of course, Donald Trump has already gleefully embraced this latest pile of manure coming from Israel, saying it proves he was 100% correct about Iran. And so now he's got his excuse to pull out of the Iranian deal. And I want to make a comment here. I think Iran should have a right to nuclear weapons. In an age where the U.S. and Israel are attacking countries that don't have nuclear weapons, I think Iran having nuclear weapons would be the path to peace. In fact, I think every nation on earth ought to have nuclear weapons and long-range missiles as a path to peace, to simply make war itself unthinkable. That's where we need to go. Disarmament is going to be impossible. Israel will always have their nuclear weapons. They still refuse to talk about them, which is kind of the irony here of Netanyahu out there talking about Iran concealing their nuclear weapons program when Israel still refuses to confirm the nuclear program, which we know exists from the photos that Mordecai Vanunu took at the Dimona bomb factory, or those South African documents showing that Israel was getting ready to sell that government a nuclear weapon. And despite all of that, Israel's attitude is, maybe we have them, maybe we don't. And so for Israel to come on out and scream about Iran having files of a nuclear weapons program, first of all, I wouldn't believe anything that Israel says. If the government of Israel told me it was going to be a sunny day, I would feel morally obligated to take an umbrella out with me that morning. And this does remind me of the laptop of death. But Trump now has his excuse to pull out of the P5+1 deal and start to escalate the situation towards the, it now appears, inevitable war inside Iran. Now, Prime Minister, over in Tehran, Foreign Minister Mohammad Zarif basically said that Netanyahu is the boy who can't stop crying wolf. And Netanyahu isn't really crying wolf again. He's crying nuclear duck. Remember that fiasco? The nuclear duck. It's a nuclear duck. And then there was that silly little cartoon he did up at the UN. And they've done a much nicer presentation this time, but it's still all based on lies and conjecture. It's all propaganda. It's another lie to sell us a war of conquest. Now, Iran is a peaceful nation. They're in Syria, again, at the request of the Syrian government. And Israel is saying, oh, they're coming to get us, they're coming to get us. And I think part of Israel's problem is the Israeli people are raised from birth to live in a state of total paranoia. They are taught from day one the world hates the Jewish people, the world is coming on in, and they're going to exterminate us, and anything we do to stop them is therefore justified, including shooting nonviolent protesters down at the Gaza border and dropping bombs all over the place, which apparently Israel did in Syria last night as well. But again, Iran is not a warlike nation. They have not initiated a war of conquest against another country in over 200 years, and certainly not since the Iranian Revolution that saw the U.S. puppet ruler, the Shah, kicked out. And there's something else you ought to remember. With all this talk about Iranian nukes and North Korean nukes and Iraqi nukes, which didn't exist, there really is only one country on Earth that has ever actually used nuclear weapons of mass destruction against the civilians of another country. And that's the United States. So if everybody is saying that it's time to pull back the nuclear threat, let's start with the one country that's actually done it. All right, we're going to do a shout out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. Story coming out of Sputnik News. Alexander Azadigan, who's a professor of geopolitics from the University of California and chief editor of the website Imperial News, is said that Trump is acting on orders from the Israeli lobby in Washington. Yeah, we sort of already knew that. I mean, remember when Trump was talking about pulling out of Syria? He gets a phone call from Netanyahu, and then we're back on in there with a false flag gas attack. And we're just ramping up there in Syria, and North Korea is being put on the back burner. Yeah, our government is under the control of a foreign power. I don't like it. I don't think you like it. Certainly the people who live in other countries that are under puppet rule don't like it. Why should we be any more accepting of that than anybody else? Story coming out of the Washington Times is saying that Israel is ready to bomb Iran if necessary. So they are really ramping up for a war with Iran. And this is going to get really serious. Now, a couple of things you need to understand. The United States has an agreement with Israel that in the event that Israel goes to war, even if Israel starts it, the U.S. is committed to assisting Israel. And that goes beyond merely providing them with more weapons and more ammunition. It's U.S. troops on the ground to act as bullet stoppers to protect those much more precious Israeli youth from any kind of an injury. That's what they're talking about. Russia, on the other hand, is committed to the protection of Iran. And so these people who are out there with their lies are really rolling the dice on an outright World War III, which is guaranteed to go nuclear. Because when the United States realizes that all of these small countries that it whooped on, who couldn't really defend themselves, are a different story than a military peer like Russia and China. On the day the U.S. government understands they cannot win a conventional war against Russia and China, that's when they'll resort to the nuclear arsenal, and it's going to be a bad day for anybody not wearing 2 million sunblock. Now, Macron and Rouhani are trying to work on preserving Iran's nuclear deal. And Macron has once again flipped. When he came to visit Trump, he came in saying, let's keep the deal as it is. Then when he was done with Trump, he came on out and said, well, yeah, we should add provisions to it. Now he's backed off of that again and saying that, yes, let's keep the deal in place. Iran has been perfectly in compliance. The IAEA confirms it. There are TV cameras all over the place that watch Iran's nuclear facilities. They aren't doing anything. They've been fully in compliance. Now, Rouhani is saying the deal is non-negotiable. That either they're going to stick with the deal or they're not. Now, this raises an interesting possibility. Let us for a moment stipulate, just for the sake of argument, that for once in his life, Benjamin Netanyahu is actually telling the truth, and Iran has got the plans to make a nuclear warhead. If Trump pulls out of the Iranian nuclear deal, Iran's going to build a warhead. They know what's coming. They know they're on the to-be invaded list. Mike Pompeo, on the other hand, is out there saying that either fix the deal, meaning add in Iran's long-range missiles, or just let the deal go away. But I think letting the deal go away is going to open up the door to an arms race in the Middle East. All right, let's take some phone calls. Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha, Dustin. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, Mike, there's a new suntan lotion out. God's Chosen One suntan lotion. It's $2 million bucks.
Okay, we're going to need a couple of cases of that stuff, I think.
Yeah, Mike, this attack last night, because I was watching the one website, they said at first 45 to 49 dead and 70 wounded, but now it says 19, so it's got to be somewhere in between, either more or it's not less. But, yeah, this is a provocation, man. I mean, come on, man. How much more can the Russians and Iranians take? You know? That's a long way to Iran for the Israelis to go, that's for sure.
Well,
if they want to go all the way to Iran.
It really is a long way to go, but, you know, it looks like Israel is going to be used to start the war with Iran. They'll go in, they'll bomb a couple of things, then they'll sit back and let the U.S. clean up the mess like they've done in so many other countries.
I don't know if you know this, but 2 Russian cargo planes landed in Iran yesterday. And maybe they're unloading S-300s or S-400s. I don't know. But also 2 Iranian cargo planes landed in Homa. That's one of the places that got bombed. It was 2. It says 1 or 2 landed at that one airport. So
I imagine they're replacing the weapons that got destroyed.
This is where World War III is going to start. Is here, Syria area. I think this is it. Yeah, I thought it was Ukraine, but. Well, that's part of the battlefield per se, but like they're not letting this go, Mike. I mean, Trump's crazy. I mean,
the people around him are crazy. All of Washington D.C. is crazy. They all think war is a really fun thing as long as other people get to die in it. But when this breaks out, it's going to break out everywhere. There'll be a spark someplace: Korea, Ukraine, Syria. It won't really matter where it starts. Everybody will cut loose.
But he's the president, Mike. And where's Congress and the Senate? I mean, these people's lives are on the line now. How much Israeli greenbacks is worth sitting in a bunker for the next 4 years, coming out and being dead anyway? At a point in your life, you got to say, you know, maybe this is not pushing it to the brink like this is not the smartest idea. Do you realize, Mike, Iran has such a great culture and economic, they could be such great economic with the United States, but it just don't seem like it's destined for the U.S. to be friends with anybody in the world anymore. You know, it's just we're the aggressor and we're the evil empire now. It's like along with Britain and France and Saudi Arabia and Israel, this is the axis of evil, Mike. It's sad to say, but I mean, we have been brought to this point by our own government.
Well,
nobody else.
And the government of Israel as well. I mean, we keep hearing that Israel is our only friend in the Middle East, but you need to remember, prior to the founding of Israel, we didn't have any enemies in the Middle East. We were doing business with everybody. But Israel, you know, has got their claws into the U.S. system, and they don't want us to be friends with anybody other than Israel.
Yeah, I know. I wish Donald Trump would watch the USS Liberty documentary. That'll say it all. And it's funny, when Trump was running, he said like the Saudis and 9/11, they were linked. No duh. But also the Israelis. Like I said, everything he ran on, he flipped on. Dancing with the Saudis with the sword and holding his hand over that globe, like global domination. Looked like something from Austin Powers. You know, like it's bizarre. It was very bizarre. I mean, it's funny, Mike, but it's not, because we're at a point in our history where something's coming. I mean, you can feel it.
Yeah, I've been watching this come for 20 years now. and trying to figure out a way to educate the public to create a climate in which it was going to be hopefully impossible to start a world war. But unfortunately, I've been outspent and outmanned, and all I can do is the best that I can right now to say that this war is a really bad idea. It's being fought for the bankers, being fought for Wall Street, it's being fought for the military-industrial complex, but it's bad for everybody else. Everybody loses in a war of this magnitude other than the bankers.
And it's sad because you know what, Mike? Just not our population, but the Israeli people, they're just as sheep as most Americans are. When mushroom clouds are popping up all over the countryside, I just see the average American flipping through Food Network channel or Kim Kardashian, yeah, you know, wondering when the power is going to come back on, you know, or something if they're not in the city. You know, they're just dumbed down, Mike. I mean, and it's, you know what's sad? We have no power anymore. You can see that should get everybody angry, where our word don't mean crap anymore. You know, like they don't listen to us because we're useless now. We're useless eaters. They don't listen to us. They don't care about us.
The elections are rigged, we're disenfranchised, and we don't have the kind of money that politicians are getting from people like Sheldon Adelson or George Soros. And that's why we become irrelevant in our own country. And the problem is that due to decades of bad management, our economy is hanging by a thread. Our infrastructure, with which we would have to rebuild the economy, is in a shambles. And everybody thinks that, well, we'll just have a war and we'll keep everybody afraid, and that way they'll remain under our control. Because that's what politicians and government always have as their top priority, maintaining control. No matter how bad things get, they don't want to give up control.
And Mike, one more thing on Benjamin Netanyahu went to the Knesset. He's got emergency war powers now. Did you read about that yet?
No, I didn't read about that yet.
Yeah, and his crazy defense minister, isn't that some guy Lieberman? Isn't he crazier than he is?
Avigdor Lieberman,
yes. He got emergency powers from the Knesset because, you know, they're all puppets. They're probably all blackmailed too, like ours is. You know, blackmailed and, you know, paychecks going to them, you know, at an offshore bank account somewhere in the Cayman Islands. Who knows? But, yeah, Mike, I said this ain't over yet, and this stuff's coming faster than we can keep up with now. I mean, every day.
I agree.
You know, it's every day now.
I agree.
You know?
It's everybody's prime for war. They're just waiting for a starting time. I heard a report that already large trucks carrying military tanks are heading north in Israel towards the border. So, yeah, they're getting ready.
Okay, Mike, have a good show.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to switch over to Peter in Los Angeles. Aloha, Peter. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Mike, your quote that you said many times is we're always at the mercy of the least sane, the least stable world leader.
Yep.
And that's where we are right now, unfortunately.
Yep.
But you know, Mike, this is the classic life and death, absolutely life and death, no BS case study of our own interests, or the interests of the 330 million American people. Peace in the world, of the planet surviving, is it more important than the bought and paid for Congress and bought and paid for presidency and the basically the Jewish fifth column that runs this country? That's really what it comes down to. Are they strong enough to override all sense and reason and logic and rationality, you know, or not? And it looks to me like it's not. So
no, they're all caught up in groupthink. They're all caught up in wishful thinking, magical thinking. They think they can win a nuclear war because they've all got bunkers, and they don't seem to understand that this could really spiral out of control and result, at the very least, in a new dark ages, if not an extinction level event. All right, listen, Peter, stay on the line. Going to put you on hold. I'll come right back to you after these words from our sponsors. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And once again, the address, if you'd like to support Republic Broadcasting, you can send a check or money order, or if you prefer anonymity, cash, to Republic Broadcasting Network, 2251 Double Creek Drive, number 302, Round Rock, Texas 78664. The phone number, if you want to pledge to be a recurring subscriber, is 800-724-2719, extension 03. The network thanks you. We really do need your help here. Okay, we're talking with Peter in Los Angeles. We're talking about Israel's constant aggressions and Israel's use of the U.S. military to accomplish its geopolitical goals.
And yeah, Mike, we're not using Israel. They are using us to get us into war. That's the way it goes.
Of course.
And we wouldn't be in Syria without them. We probably wouldn't have gotten into Iraq without them. This Iran thing is all Israel, really. And, you know, in the Ukraine, that's driven by Victoria Nuland and the neocons as well.
Yes.
I mean, everywhere we looked, 3 weeks ago, he killed 300 Russians. You know, how insane is that?
It's very insane. And this all goes back to the 1990s and a group that was called the Project for the New American Century, and they're still around. They have a new name. But they were putting out these policy papers that literally called for 100 years of war to bring the entire world under U.S. domination.
I swear, Mike, it's so controlled. We have not followed our own interests in our foreign policy and even in our commercial policy to a large extent anyways,
yes.
For 40 years anyways. And this is where it's gotten us. Everybody hates us. We have no real allies. All we can do is coerce people into following us. We have no moral compass because we're following the Nazi Israelis, and we're eyeball to eyeball with the Russians in an area that it could have disappeared and it wouldn't have bothered us at all. You know?
Yes.
I mean, it could have absolutely disappeared and it wouldn't bother the United States at all. Syria, even the Ukraine, for that matter. But you know, there we are, ready to fight a world war over it.
Yes,
it's
absolutely.
Unbelievable.
And I think we're going to lose this one. I think the U.S. military, you know, they like to think of themselves as invincible, but look how we lost in Vietnam against a nation that militarily really shouldn't have been able to compete with us, and we still lost there. And we never actually won the Korean War. And we're looking at all these very expensive weapon systems like the F-35. The F-35s that have already been deployed are not functioning combat units. They're still waiting for software and systems to be added to them somewhere down the road to make them actually operational. And it's just, again, it's just all about grinding as much wealth out of ordinary people as the government can grab under any excuse possible. And it really is sad. Because the United States has become the bad guy in all of this, and that is a very, very painful thing to have to deal with.
And you know, Mike, everything you said about you know our weapons technology and where we are with its reliability and everything else, all that's true. But you know, short of nuclear war, the old Napoleonic maxim that morale is to all other factors as 3 is to 1, which is why the Vietnamese, with a 50th or 100th of what we had, kicked our butts because they were willing and we weren't. And nobody wanted to be the last guy to die in Vietnam. We knew we were wrong there. We know we're wrong here. We know we're wrong in Afghanistan. We know we're wrong in Iraq. Our soldiers don't want to fight. The Israelis know they're wrong in their heart. They know they're just oppressing people. And so even for morale, the Syrians are fighting for their homes, and the Russians, you know, are fighting for their homes, but at least they're fighting for the right. And you know, how are we going to sustain any sort of long-term, short of a nuclear war military effort, when nobody trusts our political system, as you and Dustin talked about? Nobody trusts our leaders. Nobody trusts the reasons why we're there. And I won't send my daughter, I'll tell you that. My daughter is not going to go into a uniform. And this is from a 30-year Army guy.
Yeah, I understand exactly what you're saying.
So But I hope to God we don't do this. And this is a real test case, though, Mike. Is the fifth column from a foreign country, a tiny foreign country, strong enough to guide us into a suicidal venture?
It is. It's very alarming right now. These are very, very dark times, and we're trying to do the best that we can with them. But it does seem that there is something in the nature of man himself where we are susceptible to the call for war. But you're absolutely right, and even Sun Tzu said it in The Art of War. The army that feels they have the moral right on their side is the army that will prevail. Peter, we're going to let you go, take another break for commercials. We've got a bunch of callers waiting on the line, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to go right back to the phones. Jim in Chicago. Aloha, Jim. Thank you for waiting. What's on your mind today?
Hello, Michael. I have a couple of topics today. The first thing, someone needs to bitch smack Netanyahu. He's doing everything and everything under the sun just to save his job. If there was no tension in the Middle East right now, he would probably be impeached or going to jail because he knows he's done some things that are corrupt and illegal. So I think this is one of the reasons why he wants war. And as you mentioned, war is not around the corner. It's right in front of us.
Absolutely. And we know that leaders will start wars for purely personal, selfish reasons. I mean, like when Bill Clinton blew up that aspirin factory in Sudan just to distract the media from Monica Lewinsky. Netanyahu is facing possible prosecution in Israel. The Knesset tried to pass a law saying that a sitting prime minister can't be arrested or prosecuted, but that failed to get enough votes to pass.
Right. The other issue, the past several days, they're talking about those illegals who's trying to get into America through the Mexican border. This is something that really doesn't surprise me, but people really need to think about this. How come they aren't talking about the increase of homelessness in America? Every 4 minutes, someone is losing their home or losing their apartment because they can't find a job, they don't have any money. So by letting illegals into this country, where are you going to put them? There's no room in the inn. And where are the jobs for these so-called illegals?
Well, that, of course, is a very good question. But right now, these illegals are being supported by taxpayer funds. The Democrats are bringing them on in, knowing that as long as these illegals are being given money, they're going to vote Democratic. It's bread and circuses mentality.
Right. Because I was reading today where millennium, the young kids are not voting for the Democratic Party. They say they aren't going to vote at all, which means the Democrats need these illegals to vote.
Yes. They've admitted as much. The Democratic leadership has said they count on the illegal immigrant vote, even though, of course, under U.S. law, they're not supposed to be allowed to vote.
Right. And the final question, do you know who this NGO group is that's rented the buses for these illegals to get into America?
I don't know the name of the group. There's actually multiple groups involved, but they're all basically fronts for the globalists. And so somewhere up the food chain, I'm sure you're going to find George Soros.
Right. Well, Michael, that's it. You take care.
All right. Thanks an awful lot. We're going to switch over to James in Ohio. Aloha, James. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi. Well, I was at the workbench today. I had Alex Jones playing in the background. He said a number of things that really bear noting. He assured everybody that Iran has had nuclear weapons for a long time because he had information from highly placed government sources that had seen satellite scans, which is total nonsense. Like I said last week, this is a huge industrial spectacle that nobody could miss, whether intel on the ground or by satellite. I mean, it uses an enormous amount of water just for starters, but there are thousands of people involved in refining uranium to that level. It's not like making meth in an apartment. You know, you can't make one part over here and then one part over here. It's just these huge buildings with trucks going in and out all day. And he assured his listeners 2 or 3 times that he was not an Israeli lackey. But he said he actually said this is not Iraqi WMDs, and what was the other thing? He said, well, he devoted like 20 minutes of a show purely to Netanyahu's press conference, Netanyahu talking, not with a vial of yellow cake, but a diagram of yellow cake. You know, how hard is it to forge documents? He also said Israel had been caught working with Al Qaeda and ISIS, but they only did that because Al Qaeda and ISIS were the enemies of Hamas. I mean, the gymnastics was, but I think if we dodge this bullet, then a huge segment of people who supported Israel are really going to rethink their positions, because there's nothing that focuses the mind like the threat of being vaporized. You know, you and your family and everybody you know. So that's about all I have for you.
All right. Well, thanks an awful lot. And yeah, I'm rather saddened that Alex is drinking the Kool-Aid on this one. But you're absolutely right. It takes a huge facility to build nuclear weapons. Go back and look at the history of the Manhattan Project, especially the centrifuge cascades that are needed to refine uranium to weapons grade. It's huge. It's absolutely huge. I mean, we're talking hundreds of acres, and it would be impossible to miss. But we know that some of the satellite photos that have been used to try and tarnish Iran have been hoaxes. The Israeli media put out this photo from a satellite that they claimed was an Iranian Air Force base inside Syria, and it turned out to be the airport in Tehran. So, again, it's all lies. It's all lies. If there was any truth to any of this, they wouldn't resort to lies, because they'd be afraid that exposure of any one piece of information as a lie tarnishes the rest of it. So if any part of this is a hoax and a fraud, it means all of it is a hoax and a fraud. Okay, we're going to switch on over now to John in Austin. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Michael. I suppose like a lot of other people, I've been following the situation in Palestine for quite some time. And I've seen some horrible things in my time. Now, this morning, I happened to come across an interview between Abby Martin and Joe Rogan. And she talked about this T-shirt that IDF soldiers are wearing, where it says, 1 shot, 2 kills, and they're advocating shooting pregnant woman. And I thought, my God, that can't be. So I Googled it, and sure enough, I've got an image of the thing right in front of me. You've got this pregnant Arab woman in the crosshairs of a scope, and this thing on the bottom says 1 shot, 2 kills. Now, I just noticed something in the article that I hadn't noticed earlier. There's sort of, I'm guessing it's Hebrew writing on the top of this little thing, and that says apparently, let every Arab mother know that her son's fate is in my hands. Now, as I said, I've been following this for quite some time, and I've seen and heard things that leave me pretty disgusted. But this one takes me to a new low that I never, ever thought I would experience. I'm just utterly gobsmacked at this. This is just, I'm stuck for words. I'm lost for words.
Yeah, that T-shirt's been around for quite a long while, and other people have had the same reaction that you do, that it is barbarous in the extreme. I mean, the idea that you're just shooting pregnant women. But on the other hand, Israel is down there on the border with Gaza, just gunning down these peaceful protesters.
I know.
And they're using apparently expanding ammunition to inflict a maximum damage. They're specifically targeting elbows and knees to permanently cripple people. They're refusing to allow the wounded to seek medical attention in the West Bank, and as a result, limbs are being amputated.
Yep. They're committing just about every crime there is in the book.
Yep.
And jolly old American taxpayer is footing the bill.
Yep.
Just unreal.
It is.
Okay, that's all I got, Mike. Thanks, mate.
All right, thanks an awful lot, and we're going to switch over to Mark in North Carolina. Aloha, Mark. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Mike, I was listening to Alex Jones earlier too. He's actually speaking out of both sides of his mouth. So he's saying he's giving some credibility to Netanyahu's nonsense, but he's also saying we need to stay out of it at the same time. And then he had Rivero Salente finish off the show, actually took over the fourth hour, and before they spoke, and Salente's totally against war. He doesn't, and he understands. But as far as Netanyahu goes, I don't know if the guy doesn't understand something, or maybe he doesn't care. We get into a war because of Israel. And let's say it doesn't, if it turns nuclear, forget it. Nobody's going to win. It's going to be probably end of the planet, period. But if it gets a prolonged war, let's say, just do it with, let's say, Putin decides to just arm the Iranians and let them, and let us sink in and have to have a draft and everything else. If that happens, what's going to happen is there is so much anti-Semitism just at the bottom, at the very, not at the surface so much, but just below the surface. You can see it on the net. You can see it on the what do you call it, on the comment sections. And it's not, it's not anti-Zionism. It's actually anti-Jew. And this is going to really come to the surface and get uglier and uglier if Israel draws us into a war. Now, I don't know.
Hang on a second. Hang on a second. You need to be aware that a lot of the anti-Jew comments are being put there by paid propagandists to support Israel's claim that anti-Semitism is behind criticism of the government of Israel. And it's a huge PR effort because Israel wants to deflect criticism for what they do by saying that it's just hatred of the Jews, which makes as much sense as deflecting criticism of the Nazis by saying you hate the German people. But they spend a huge amount of resources on maintaining that illusion that there's anti-Semitism in the world, when it's actually just justifiable criticism of the actions of the government of Israel.
Well, when I say that, I'm saying that another war like this, knowing that Israel dragged us into it, even if there isn't real anti-Semitism, but anti-Semitism is a silly statement anyway, since the Palestinians are probably the descendants of the original Jews that were down there in the first place.
Yes.
But that's besides the point. The fact of the matter is going to be, that's why I say anti-Jew, because this is what it's going to cause. Now, I'm wondering whether Netanyahu doesn't care about that, thinking, well, this will cause more Jews to move to Israel. Maybe all of American Jews move to Israel. I don't know. I don't know what's in that clown's mind. But I'll tell you this. This is one dangerous human being. He is when Trump called, Assad an animal, that's the real animal. Why didn't he call Netanyahu an animal? I put that on my Facebook, by the way, in answer to a column by Cynthia McKinney. And, I said, why didn't he call Netanyahu an animal? By the way, do you ever think of getting Cynthia, can you ever get her on your show?
I've had her on the show before, but yeah, I'll try and get her back on again. I need more guests on the show anyway.
And what about Tulsi Gabbard? Is she, I know she's kind of towards the left. How is she as far as the Second Amendment? That to me is very important. If I'm going to vote for somebody, they have to at least be in, for gun rights for American people, including so-called assault weapons, because we need it more than ever. When you see how this government is today, it's, that is so important, because I could really go for her otherwise, but I don't know what she feels on that. I know Cynthia McKinney, believe it or not, is pro-Second Amendment now. She said that a few years ago on her own show. So that's a real plus for her. And Jesse Ventura is also very pro-Second Amendment, but both are very anti-war. So these are the type of people I think we got to look to maybe run third party and become president in 2020. Of course, that's if we have a planet left by then.
Yeah, we could very well see the collapse of this government before 2020. Overall, I like Tulsi Gabbard. I've approached her office about having her on the show. They have never replied. She is very much in favor of gun control, including the banning of the sporting rifles. So obviously she loses points on that one.
Yeah, that's a big negative to me. I can't support somebody because I think that's the Second Amendment is probably the most important amendment right now in the Bill of Rights. It basically is the teeth of the rest of the Bill of Rights. Without that, we would really have oppression. We just about have it already.
Yes.
But I mean, they are afraid of right? They are afraid to be armed citizens in this country. That I know. That I know for a fact. That's why they, every chance they get, and they'll even pull up the false flags. They'll kill kids in schools just to show, to get people against the Second Amendment. I don't, as far as Sandy hoax goes, I don't think anybody died in Sandy hoax. That was just a complete hoax. But I do believe people died in the Florida shooting, the Marjorie Stoneman school there. I believe people were killed there, and I believe people were killed in Vegas. It all depends on how much time deep state has to organize these things. But we need that Second Amendment, and I cannot support. I was looking at something about with Dennis Kucinich. He's bragging how much against the Second Amendment he is. So I could. Well, he's running for Ohio governor now. I can't support that. I really can't. I mean, to me, that is it. That is a non-negotiable line. We can negotiate on other things, but not the Second Amendment. That, to me, is what's keeping the country as free as possible as we can be right now. So I don't know what you got to think. All right, Mike?
Well, the Second Amendment, I agree, is very important. I tend to think the First Amendment is a little more important, and now that is coming under attack as well, where they're trying to carve out the Palestinian exception, where you don't have freedom of speech to criticize Israel. And, of course, once they get that, there'll be other areas. They'll say, well, you can't criticize vaccine makers, you can't criticize GMO. The Bill of Rights is very much under attack right now. There's no question about it.
But that's where the Second Amendment comes into being, because if they do try to oppress us like that and try to oppress the First Amendment, there's where the Second Amendment, because I think we're either heading towards a third world war or we're heading towards an out-and-out revolution in this country, because it doesn't seem like the elections are doing it anymore, unless we get the absolute right people. We thought we had it in Trump, though I had my doubts. Turns out the man's either a punk or a liar, or both. So, it just seems to me that that's probably where we're headed. Terrible thing to think, but I just don't know. It just seems like
you're absolutely right. Trump has been a tremendous disappointment, and part of the problem is apparently he doesn't have the spine we thought he did. He's too easy to sway. Apparently, he responds well to flattery. If you flatter him, you will get him to basically agree with you about whatever it is you're talking about.
He does, and of course, he's this Kushner. He should never have Kushner in there. This guy's a first of all, you should never have relatives or children in your government in the first place. Okay, it only leads to problems. But it's nepotism. You should never have nepotism. But if you do, this is a guy who's talk about Zionist. His father is a personal friend of Netanyahu. His father, by the way, is a crook. On top of it, he did time, and on top of that, he had him over as a house guest. So he just has some trouble with that.
All right. Well, listen, we're going to have to let you go. We got to take a break for commercials, and we will be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And Fox News is already rerunning Netanyahu's little presentation. And I'll tell you the thing that really stood out for me about that was how they had all these CDs in this nice display frame. To me, that's definite stagecraft. That's definite propaganda. All right, let's take a few more phone calls, then we're going to close the lines because I need to get back to some news here. Mo in Florida, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Michael. I was just going to listen to everybody. It's called in. It is very scary what's going on. But what really woke me up is when I think there's a majority of people get their news from the Drudge Report. And Matt Drudge, his background, his father was a Reformed Jew, I believe, and his mother worked for Kennedy. So they're liberals. And when you see that headlines, Bibi says Iran lies. That I knew we're in trouble because, without Zero Hedge, and I know Zero Hedge isn't perfect, and I know you look at Zero Hedge. Without Zero Hedge, who else is left other than your show and a few others? Because everybody that really does any research knows Alex Jones and Matt Drudge are buddies, and it all connects to this almost a Christian Messiah. Israel is going to take over the world. The greater Israel, and it's like mass hysteria. I mean, did you see the headlines with the Drudge Report?
I generally don't go to the Drudge Report anymore. He and I had a falling out many years ago, back when I was working on the Vince Foster case, because I found this documentation, or actually other people found this documentation that showed the government was lying about the number of wounds on Foster's body. And back then, I was friends with Drudge, and I was feeding him this information, and he wouldn't run with it. Instead, he went with that bogus claim about Sidney Blumenthal and domestic abuse, which resulted in him being sued, and that made him famous, and then the lawsuit was dropped. And at that point, I realized that Matt is as controlled as any other media that's out there. And you're right, unfortunately, a lot of the so-called independent media is not, in fact, independent, as the earlier call about Alex Jones confirmed for us. But there are, unfortunately, fewer and fewer truly objective, analytical, independent media outlets out there, of which Republic Broadcasting obviously is one.
Yeah, also, I'll try to be brief because I didn't want to get on with your talking points, but you know who Greg Hunter is, right? With former CNN, he's got quite a following on USA, his USA channel.
Yes.
Greg Hunter, you know who he is, right?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, he left CNN because they wouldn't let him stay because he wanted to tell the truth. But I've emailed the guy. I've had some conversations with him. He's another one of these guys. If you bring up Israel, everything's shut down because God's behind Israel. Whatever they do, you can't argue with, and that's what we're up against. So. I don't know. I don't got nothing against Jewish people.
Yeah, Israel has shamelessly exploited the Christians in this country for political support. Anyway, listen, Mo, got to let you go. Got to take a break for station identification. We'll be right back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're going to go back to the phones. We're going to take a few more phone calls, then we're going to close the lines for a bit. Bruce in Texas. Aloha, Bruce. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind today?
Yes. Hello, Michael. Hey, then Benjamin Netanyahu kind of sounded to me like maybe General Jack D. Ripper with a Yiddish accent.
That's a good analogy, actually. And for the younger audience who may not get the reference, General Jack D. Ripper was the character in Dr. Strangelove who just went ahead and launched a nuclear strike against the Soviet Union.
Yeah. Well, I think it's important that the caller from Wisconsin, is it Bill? Bill in Wisconsin?
Yeah.
He's a regular caller that called you early. Yeah. I respect his opinions, but like most of us, he's been misinformed, I believe, and he's LARPing back to the Nazis, this, Nazis, that. I have a book that I purchased about 5 years ago on Amazon that I think's been banned now, and I just picked it up and opened it a couple of days ago. And I've been reading about the days leading up to World War II, and what actually happened was German civilians were being brutalized. They were being chased out of the Polish territory, and they were basically the city of London had it out for Germany since 1933, and they maneuvered to push Hitler's buttons into invading Poland, and they made a backdoor deal with Stalin to dupe Hitler into signing the non-aggression pact, so he would feel confident as he moved to what he saw as protecting German civilians that were being butchered and chased out of their homes, and they were even being thrown in Polish concentration camps. And so I think we just need, if we make it through this point in history alive, I think we need to really review everything that we've been taught and come to a clear understanding. Maybe we can make this understanding spread and not being led around by the nose by propaganda and fear mongering. What do you think?
Well, absolutely. We need to be very skeptical of anything coming out of the government. We need to look at all the times that we have been lied into wars. The clearest example, of course, being Saddam's nuclear weapons. But our government's been doing it all along. Torpedoes in the Gulf of Tonkin, Spanish mine in Havana Harbor. This is how they get the American people to sacrifice their money and the lives of their children in what really are wars of conquest. And we do need to be very skeptical about what's going on. We need to be very skeptical about Netanyahu's little presentation earlier today. And I'm very alarmed that so many people are just saying, oh, absolutely, we believe and trust anything that Israel would say. When you remember that the motto of Israel's security services is, by way of deception, thou shalt do war.
Yes, it is. And there have been people from the inside that have been honest about what the Mossad and the Israeli government has done over the years. And I think it's worth looking back and finding their books as well. But anyway, I'll let you go with that.
All right. Well, thanks an awful lot. I mean, one of the authors that people should be hunting down his books is Victor Ostrovsky, who wrote a book by way of deception, talking about his experiences in Israel's Mossad and some of the dirty tricks that they used, in particular, to trick Ronald Reagan into bombing Libya. Yeah, that's how these things get done, and we need to recognize that's how they get done. All right, let's take a phone call from Al in Canada. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. The caller that you had on that was talking about the Second Amendment, and basically described that's the basic backbone to a person's freedom and liberty. Really struck a note with me, because on the weekend there was an article on the CBC about banning lead. Wasn't that tried in your country a couple of years back?
Yeah, they wanted to force everybody to use, I think it was tungsten ammunition, because the theory was that lead ammunition was toxifying the environment, which, yes, lead is very, very toxic. The problem with using tungsten bullets, of course, is that it wears out the barrel of the gun very quickly.
Yeah, and at that point, it becomes expensive, and or they write new laws. So, here's how far it went in the CBC article. It really focused on the poisoning of the wildlands and that, but they even brought out the children card. We have to do this for our children.
Yeah.
So, it's getting extreme. I mean, in the United States, it's a little different. You can almost, a lot of places you could just open carry. Up here in Canada, you can't, but we still have hunting guns and rifles and such, right?
Yes.
So it's just amazing that, basically, when a country's disarmed, they just go nuts and do whatever they want.
That's always been the case in history.
And yet, who's the boss? It just goes to show you how screwed up people become when they start actually depending on the government. They're willing to just blindly do whatever they want. I mean, there were tests on these sort of things, the psychological tests.
Yes.
Right?
Yep.
And, obviously you would have failed it. I would have failed it, but and every person that called into your show today would have failed it. But they'll do whatever, what someone says that has the appearance of authority. It's amazing how brainwashed people are.
The Milgram experiment.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
It is. It's crazy. Anyways, I know you want to get back to the news, so thanks a lot for having me, Mike, and you have a good one.
All right. Thanks an awful lot. Okay, and we're going to go to Andrew in, I assume it's California. Aloha, Andrew. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Okay, it looks like we lost him. All right, so we're going to close the phone lines for a little bit, and I'm going to get some more news out here. First of all, we're going to do a shout out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. And getting on back to the situation in Iran, Mike Pompeo, just a day after being confirmed as Secretary of State, he's already shuttling around the world. He's saying the State Department is back in business after this lull under Rex Tillerson. But Pompeo is a guy who's a known advocate of bombing first and asking questions later. And it's already expected that he's going to be on board with just going into Iran and blowing up suspected nuclear sites. The problem with that, of course, is we've already gone into Syria, blowing up suspected chemical weapon sites that turned out to be innocent and benign here. Now, Iran, of course, has been faithfully keeping to the deal all along since it was signed in 2015. They're under IAEA inspection. They're under video surveillance. They have not done anything they're not supposed to be doing. And it's the U.S. that's acted in bad faith on this whole situation. And now Iran is thinking that maybe this deal of fully adhering to the P5+1 agreement may have been a liability. And they're starting to think it was a mistake because of the fact that the U.S. didn't really keep its agreements. It didn't remove all the sanctions. Then Congress passed more sanctions. And so the deal was entirely one-sided. Iran was doing what they were supposed to do. The U.S. did not. So it looks like that deal is coming to an end. And the question is, at what point will the war follow? Now, getting on down to Syria, it looks like there was a major attack, a missile attack, into Hama and Aleppo. And we're getting mixed reports about whether Iranian soldiers were killed or not. Some sources are saying, yes, we got the Iranians. Those are mostly coming from Israel, saying that was the reason. We had to get those Iranians. And others are saying that no Iranians were killed, but a lot of ordnance was. About 200 surface-to-surface missiles were destroyed, which obviously should have been dispersed to prevent exactly that from happening. But apparently seismologists were able to detect the attack, suggesting that bunker busters, ground-penetrating munitions, were actually being used. And it was a major attack. A lot of people thought that Netanyahu would at least mention it during this morning's press conference, but no, he was out there saying, Iran lied, Iran lied, Iran lied. Well, if so, it's hardly unique to Iran. Look at how much our government and the government of Israel lies. Article coming out of the Times of Israel is saying that the overnight attack is a coordinated U.S.-Israel message to Russia and Iran to butt the heck out of Syria. So they're edging closer and closer to direct conflict with the Russians. Okay, now apparently Syria's army is continuing to make gains against the U.S.-backed militants. They've liberated the districts of Al-Mad, I'm going to butcher this, Al-Madinaya, Al-Asali, Al-Qadam, and Al-Jura in the southern countryside of Damascus from ISIS. And they captured all these areas after air and artillery strikes had destroyed the ISIS defense there. This is where that Russian aviation really becomes a deal changer. Now, U.S.-backed militants are saying that they've regained some of the villages seized by the Syrian army. So the fighting is continuing on over there. Meanwhile, down in Afrin, there's been an interesting new development. The militants there are backed by Turkey, and they've started basically kidnapping civilians and holding them hostage. And they're demanding money to free their hostages. Apparently, they've also tortured them and plundered their property. So things are going south down there. Meanwhile, Syrian troops have surrounded a Palestinian refugee camp currently held by Islamic State militants in southern Damascus, where hundreds of Palestinians face an uncertain future. They don't know what is going to happen. Okay, story out of antiwar.com. President Trump is still talking about withdrawing troops from Syria relatively soon, but his actions and his words are not lining up. The impression on the ground in Syria is very much that the U.S. troops are staying, reinforcements are arriving, and the Pentagon is showing no signs of rolling back any deployments. Over 2,000 U.S. troops are deployed at a dozen bases in Syria, mostly in the northeast, where the oil and gas happens to be. Reports out of the area is the U.S. continues to expand the bases, building perimeter walls, defensive ditches, and helicopter landing pads. So the U.S. basically has invaded Syria, and it's time we start calling that. It's a U.S. invasion. Dennis Kucinich was on Larry King and is out there saying that deep state elements are pushing for an enlarged Syrian conflict. And Kucinich told Russia Today's Politicking there are deep state elements influencing U.S. foreign policy, citing examples from Trump, Obama, and Bush administrations. Well, we know who's really pushing for more war in Syria and Iran. He was on TV this morning with his frames full of CDs. And once again, legal experts are chiming on in to say that the U.S., British, and French airstrikes on Syria were not based on international law. It was outright naked aggression. And it really didn't accomplish anything other than to illustrate to the world the high failure rates of American-made weapons. Up in Afghanistan, there have been 2 suicide bombings that killed 25, including 9 reporters. And this is getting very, very ugly when the journalists on the ground, who are supposed to be our prime sources for information, what's going on, are being targeted. Not just in Afghanistan, but down there on the border between Gaza and Israel. They've been deliberately targeting journalists down there as well. Apparently, 8 civilians have been killed in Saudi airstrikes across Yemen in the past 24 hours, and Saudi Arabia has been seen attacking the ambulances, transporting the wounded to local hospitals. They're just coming on down and strafing them. That, I think, is also a war crime. It's amazing. Now, the Arabic language Al Akhbar newspaper has released the text of a letter written by Kawar to the UAE diplomats on November 22nd of last year, in which she elaborated on her meeting with Mike Bell, a retired U.S. Army colonel who served in the Iraq War and is now Trump's top Middle East advisor on the National Security Council. And quoting Bell, basically said that it's time to spread the proxy wars against Iran in Yemen to Lebanon. So they're getting ready to go into Lebanon as well. And it's all justified by, we have to get Iran. We have to get Iran. We have to get Iran. Iran has done nothing to us. Iran has not invaded the United States of America. They have not flown warplanes over the United States of America. They have not sent their warships to cruise off of our coasts. The United States government is clearly the aggressor in this modern age of war. Saudi Arabia is starting to really crack down on their population. They've arrested nearly 1 million people in just 4 days. And apparently 14,000 of the people were stopped by the security agencies and border security forces regarding issues of residency and labor relations and attempted infiltration across the border into the kingdom. 58% of those arrested were Yemenis, 39% were Ethiopian, 3% from other nationalities. I can imagine that a lot of people in Yemen are trying to get out of the country, and obviously Saudi Arabia and Yemen share a common border. So maybe Saudi Arabia needs their own version of the wall. More about that a little bit later. Up in Ukraine, and we saw this coming, we had advance warning this was going to happen. Poroshenko has announced the beginning of a military operation that will last until, quote, the liberation of Donbass and Crimea. So they're getting ready to basically just launch an all-out war into the Donbass area and to retake Crimea. That, of course, brings Ukraine into direct conflict with the Russian republics, of which Crimea is now a member. So that's another flashpoint. We know world war is coming. We know a global war is coming. We're just figuring out where's it actually going to start. But once it starts anywhere, it'll happen everywhere. And that's something we all need to be prepared to deal with. And again, if you have not made preparations to last, to take care of yourself and your family with a collapsed supply chain for a reasonable amount of time, you need to start. If you're not a prepper, you are really going to get hit when the war breaks out. Now, down in Israel, the Palestinians are still protesting to mark Land Day, and Israel is still responding with lethal force. It's being called carnage down there. And somebody went around and discovered that apparently, along with targeting journalists, Israel is targeting Palestinian athletes. And apparently there were some 30 Palestinian athletes that were in the Gaza Strip, and they were targeted. And several were shot in the head. A number of the wounded had their lower limbs amputated. This was a guy who was preparing to represent Palestine in the Asia tournament, and now he can't do that. There was a soccer player who was shot in both of his feet and suffered damage to one of his knees. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Now, Amnesty International has called for an arms embargo against Israel because of what Israel is doing to the protesters on the Gaza border. And you need to understand that the agreement by which the United States arms Israel is that the weapons provided are to be used for defensive purposes only. Of course, obviously, as we saw last night, Israel commits offensive crimes against other people, and that's what's happening down on the Gaza border as well. The protesters there are just marching peacefully. They've got banners. They are not carrying weapons of any kind. There hasn't been a single Israeli casualty during this confrontation. It's just military snipers who are firing from 100 meters away, and they're literally being ordered to shoot these people. And as I've said many times before on the show, to me this is as great a crime as the British massacre at Amritsar. Now, Mike Pompeo is defending Israel over the Palestinian-Gaza border death, saying that Israel has a right to defend itself. Against what? A sign on a stick? Shameful. Just shameful that Mike can look at what's going on down there and say, oh yeah, Israel's right to do it. Those protesters, they shouldn't protest. They should love Israel. Now, Israel's right-wing Yisrael Britanu, led by Avigdor Lieberman, is pushing the Knesset for a new law to criminalize any documentation of army violations against Palestinians. They're aware they're dealing with a huge public relations disaster. They're trying to deal with it by shooting the Palestinian journalists. But now they actually want to have a law that says it is a criminal offense to document army violations against the Palestinians. Israel does not believe in freedom of speech. Apparently, Israel occupation forces have uprooted hundreds of olive trees planted by pro-Palestine supporters in the northern Jordan Valley. And human rights activists from Beit Salam and Araf Daragmeh have said the Israeli occupation forces uprooted the olive trees planted by Palestinians and pro-Palestine activists last week. Now, these were planted to replace olive trees which had previously been uprooted by the Israeli occupation forces the week before. Now, there's more than just symbolism involved here, because the export of olives is one of the few ways the Palestinians can earn a living. And it takes 10 years for an olive tree to grow to the point where it produces a usable crop. So this is an attack on their economy. It's an attack on their ability to make a living. Story coming out of immc.org, where the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs is confirming there is a steady increase in attacks against Palestinians by the illegal settlers. And we've certainly seen an increase in that sort of thing over the last couple of weeks. They're just ramping up and ramping up and ramping up. So, now, there was this Palestinian teenager, Mohammed Abu Qadir, was brutally tortured and then set on fire and burned to death by Israeli settlers back in 2014. The parents have filed a civil lawsuit for roughly $1.6 million in damage. And they're saying the goal is not to make money, but to just bring the world's attention back to this horrific barbarity by the settlers. And we do need to pay attention to this stuff. You know, forget about Kim Kardashian. She's not that interesting. Forget about Stormy Daniels. Look at what's going on in Israel and then understand that the U.S. government is fully on board with it, as obviously witnessed by Mike Pompeo's comments. Now, we've mentioned this before. We're going to mention it again. Israel right now is in the process of building a settlers-only railroad to connect the illegal settlements in the West Bank. And to do it, they're grabbing Palestinian land and just saying, sorry, we need the land to put the tracks on. And the rail line, again, will be for settlers only, just like there are Jewish-only roads in Israel, paid for by your tax dollars. Our government can't afford to repair the roads in this country, certainly not here in Hawaii. But your taxes are going to build brand new state-of-the-art roads for Jews only in Israel. We're going to take another break for commercials, and we will be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Now, this story is very upsetting to me, okay? And what it has to do with is there's a lot of pressure being put on Donald Trump to attend the opening of the U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem next month. And the latest word is he's considering allowing Jonathan Pollard to leave the United States and go to Israel to commemorate the embassy launch. Now, that is a slap in the face of the American people. Pollard spent nearly 30 years in prison for spying for Israel. And he was paroled in 2015 and told he could not leave the U.S., could not move to Israel, where he's seen as a hero. And you need to go back and look at the enormity of this guy's crime. This guy stole key documents related to America's nuclear defense, and he sold them to Israel. Israel turned around and traded them to the Soviet Union in exchange for increased immigration quotas for Russian Jews to come to Israel. Had we gone to nuclear war with the Soviet Union at that point, we would have lost. That is the scale of Pollard's treason. But he's a big hero in Israel. They named streets after him. They want him back so that they can just say, oh, he's a wonderful guy. Look what he did for us. And it looks like Trump is going to let him do that. Now, not too long ago, a lot of people were taken by surprise over the report that 4 Americans were killed in Niger, in Africa. And everybody said, what, we've got military forces in Niger? What are they doing there? Well, as it turns out, U.S. troops are all over Africa, in some 20 African countries, most in the northern half of the continent. Now, they're small forces, but they're in these countries. And these are not on the officially released list of 7 countries with which we are actually at war with. So we don't know where the U.S. has military forces. We don't know what they're up to. Now, Africa is a strategic target because it is the world's largest repository of undeveloped natural resources. Oil, gold, silver, all kinds of things. And that's why so many countries are gazing avariciously at it. Over in Korea, they're still celebrating the meeting between Kim Jong-un and Moon Jae-in, and what appears to be the imminent formal end of the Korean War. They're talking reunification. Kim Jong-un is saying that he will give up his nuclear weapons for a U.S. pledge not to invade. Now, I can't believe that he is being that naive, looking at what happened in Iraq, Syria, Libya, ad infinitum. So there may be something else on the horizon, like the reunification, because at that point, the U.S. Wouldn't have a justification to invade. Now, Kim Jong-un has announced they're shutting down their nuclear test site. Actually, it's already falling apart. Apparently, the mountain is so badly shattered from the previous nuclear tests, it's unusable. But U.S. experts are going to be invited to witness the formal shutdown of their nuclear weapons test site. But North Korea is saying they've halted all testing on nuclear weapons and long-range ballistic missiles. Oh, Kim. Did you know the word gullible is not in the dictionary? Bolton is out there demanding that North Korea abandon their nuclear weapon first before the meeting between Kim Jong-un and Donald Trump. Now, Kim Jong-un is saying all the right things, but Bolton is just inserting himself into this discussion so he can look like the tough guy again. So we'll see what happens with that. The U.S. wants North Korea to take irreversible steps to denuclearize, similar to Libya's denuclearization. And that means to basically smash it all up, smash the centrifuges, tear it all down so it cannot easily be rebuilt. Libya did do that, and look what the U.S. did to Libya afterwards. That's why I think Kim Jong-un is being very naive, unless he's got something up his sleeve. If he and Moon Jae-in have already agreed to announce the reunification at some point in the immediate future, then it all makes sense. Now, Mattis is saying that if a Korea peace deal is reached, that the U.S. will probably withdraw at least some of their U.S. troops on the Korean Peninsula. So some 30,000 U.S. troops are deployed in South Korea. So we'll see what happens there. Now, according to the New York Slimes, Donald Trump is finally gearing up to campaign for the Republican Party for the midterms, and he's already at odds with the GOP leadership. The GOP leadership wants to campaign on the tax reform. That's a bad move. The tax reform hasn't really eased the tax burden on anybody but the ultra-rich. But Trump wants to focus on the immigration and the trade agenda and try and keep the campaign focused on that. Meanwhile, of course, the Democrats are still out there focusing on Trump, Russia, Trump, Russia, Trump, Russia. They really don't have a platform going into the midterms at all. And their lead in the polls is dwindling day by day by day. Now, here's an interesting story. This is coming from Hal Turner, and so take it with a grain of salt. But according to Hal Turner, the Justice Department has offered Hillary Clinton a plea bargain in the issue over her mishandling of classified emails. And according to Hal Turner, the issue will be that Hillary will sign a document admitting she committed a prosecutable crime, and in return, the Department of Justice will not actually prosecute. Now, I'm not sure I'm ready to buy this, and unfortunately, admitting that you committed a prosecutable crime but not being prosecuted for it does not invalidate Hillary as a future political candidate. And I still think that she's seriously thinking about stepping back in 2020. Now, getting into the economic news, Trump is promising to take on the European Union in a new trade war. And he may be using this to distract from the fact of his domestic struggles. He's got a legislature and judiciary increasingly unwilling to go along with his agenda. And apparently the new bluster and threats of trade war with other nations seems to be Trump's rallying cry to the faithful, which unfortunately are also dwindling. A lot of people who supported Donald Trump, or to be more accurate, opposed Hillary Clinton, they're very disappointed in what Trump has done here. So, another trade war with Europe to go with the one in China here. The Federal Reserve Bank has issued a statement saying that cash promotes crime. And cash has many advantages, but its end might be near. They're pushing that cashless society idea. They want everything on those little plastic cards, meaning all the money is in the banks. None of it is in your pocket. And because there's no such thing as cash, there can't be a run on the bank. If people get scared and want to take their savings out of the bank, there's no way the bank can hand it to them. All they can do is send it to another bank, who will promptly send it back when requested. Cash represents freedom. It represents the freedom to buy a jelly donut on your way home and not have the bank and possibly the government know that you did it. But apparently the Federal Reserve wants to take that away from us. I mean, first they took away value-based money in their creation. Then they took away the metal content in the coinage that represented true wealth. They've inflated the value out of the dollar since then. And now they want to take cash away completely. This is why I keep saying those private central banks are instruments of slavery. You're not going to be allowed to have your own wealth in your own pocket. Now, apparently there's been a study over at LinkedIn that is showing Great Britain is losing their workers to the European Union. It's a brain drain. We've seen the same thing happening in this country for a couple of decades now, as our society turned its back on manufacturing and engineering, if you will. Those people who really know how to do that have been successfully lured to other countries where their skills and talents are more highly respected. But apparently, Great Britain is going through the same thing, and they're losing workers to other member states of the European Union. Now, this caravan of illegals has finally arrived at the border fence near Tijuana, and they're scaling the U.S. border fence. It's not really a very good fence. They're cheering Gracias, Mexico, for allowing them to travel from Central America to the U.S. border. Looking at the pictures, though, I have a question. Where are all the National Guardsmen that the governor of California promised were going to be there to contain this caravan? Because I was looking at the pictures of these illegals climbing over the border. I didn't see anybody there trying to stop them. Now, U.S. officials still have not allowed members of the Central American caravan to apply for asylum. So they're inside the country. They haven't filled out the paperwork. It's just another surge of illegal immigrants coming on into our country. And here, I think, is one of the biggest betrayals so far. Donald Trump is telling farmers that they're going to let in migrant guest workers. In other words, they're going to allow a certain number of illegals to come on in and work the farms. And he's justifying this on the basis that the unemployment numbers are so good. And for that reason, he's going to allow guest workers in the country to work the fields and do seasonal labor. There are two problems with that. First of all, the unemployment numbers are just as phony as the stock market. We know that there are roughly 100 million Americans willing and able to work who have not been able to find a job for months, if not years. They're just put in a separate category, so they're not counted as part of the unemployment numbers. The books are being cooked. The second problem is, of course, that most farm labor is today being done by machines. The days of hand-picking crops are pretty much gone. So I don't know what he's thinking about doing that. Okay. Now, over in Sweden, which, as you know, is ultra-liberal and very much in favor of the open borders agenda, they've had an issue where a Syrian migrant was convicted on 2 counts of rape against a 12-year-old girl. And his defense was that he didn't know that sex with a 12-year-old was illegal in that country. And the guy's a Syrian asylum seeker. And apparently he raped the 12-year-old twice on the same day last summer. He's been sentenced to just 6 months of detention in a youth care facility. So when you move to another country, when you go to a country, you learn the laws. It's like Teddy Roosevelt said about people coming to the United States. If you want to come to the U.S., you are welcome to be here. Just understand, we have our laws. We have one language, that's English. And there's only one flag that you're going to be loyal to, and that's the American flag. And that's the way it should be working. And we have too many of these refugees who are trying to bring their culture with them, and it's causing a lot of harm and destruction. Now, over in Great Britain, the Home Secretary, Amber Rudd, has now resigned amid this migrant Windrush scandal. His resignation was accepted by Theresa May. And I'm hearing something in the other room here. So apparently there's a major shakeup going on over there. All right, we're going to open the phone lines now. If you want to call on in, we can talk about a few things here. And we're going to start talking now about computers. I don't remember if I mentioned this on Friday or not, but as you know, there was this Facebook app that was collecting personal data for Cambridge Analytica. And Facebook is now admitting that they did not read the terms of the app that harvested the data of 87 million people. They just put it on up there and didn't realize what it was going to be doing, or at least that's what they're saying. Maybe they're putting that out as an excuse to avoid being included in a lawsuit against Cambridge Analytica. Hey, we're innocent victims too. We had no idea what was going on. Now, over at BMW, they have their latest cars are the keyless models, where there is no key, there is merely the fob. And as long as the fob is present in the car, you can hit that start button, the engine will start up, you can drive away. There's only one small problem. Apparently those fobs are easy to impersonate using gadgets that you can actually buy online. And BMW is now saying it is absolutely powerless to prevent criminals from hacking into its cars using these devices. Well, that's a big goof. Maybe keyless isn't such a good idea. Now, over at MSNBC, Joy Reid is still dealing with some posts that she made a while back. More when we come back from these words from our sponsors. Aloha America, welcome back to the show here. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Over at MSNBC, Joy Reid has been trying to deal with a controversy over some posts that she made years ago, which come across as offensive to the LGBT, PDQ, BFD community. And again, when we're young, we often say callous things. And I do think it's outdated. But what Joy Reid did that made the issue worse is she claimed her account was hacked to make her look bad. And experts over at the Internet Archive have taken a look and said, no, she really did say those things. So it's like Richard Nixon said, it's not the crime that does you in, it's the cover-up. Now, up in Canada, authorities there have seized servers that they claim are linked to ISIS. And they're trying to take down the terrorist group's propaganda network, or it's somebody's propaganda network. And apparently Canada did not get the memo that ISIS actually works for the U.S. government. But at least they're out there getting those. We should go after the botnets, though. Over in Indiana, there's a school district, Black Hawk Middle School in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and they've issued an apology because a middle school teacher was accused of letting her disdain for President Trump and Fox News influence her teaching. And this teacher, Sarah Ford, assigned a student a report on Trump's many lies, and then apparently bullied the student. And the parents got very upset, understandably, and the district has put out an apology. And it's another reminder, modern education is not about education, it's about indoctrination. And I seriously doubt this one teacher is the only one who's out there using the classroom to basically try and politicize the kids. We're going to take a phone call. Jeff in Georgia, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Michael, aloha. It's always good to call in, and I always appreciate the opportunity to talk. I called in last week, Michael, and I said we had to have closer relations with Mexico because that's where our future lies. I'm looking at a post-Zionist world. The Anglo-Saxon power, the British, the American powers, that's done. They were puppets to, Jewish bankers, which what we have, Michael, worldwide is the biggest threat to mankind is really is white supremacy. But and I'm a white man, but I'm calling to say this. I want to take it further about why we have to be close to Mexico and why I believe that our future immigration policy has to be America-centric, the Americas, not the world.
Okay, Jeff, Jeff, I have to put you on hold. Jeff, I have to put you on hold. Don't hang up. I'm going to come right back to you after station identification. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking with Jeff in Georgia, and Jeff is talking once again about our future lies in Mexico. And the only way I see that happening is if Israel takes over what is currently the United States and sends us to live in Mexico as sort of a new Palestine. The U.S. and Mexico are just worlds apart on so many different aspects of economy, technology development, manufacturing. Mexico is ahead of us, obviously, in agriculture. I really don't see that as working out all that well. I know it's part of the agenda behind NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement. But again, I'm a person who thinks that America should be for Americans. And the United States should be for the citizens of the United States. And I really don't see us as having much to gain by continuing to open our borders with Mexico.
Well, Michael, I'm for our sovereignty, not for helping people, but you realize the hypocrisy when you have basically millions of indigenous people. They may have some Spanish blood, but millions of indigenous people in the Southwest and Mexico and Central America. They're living on basically, they're living in poverty. And, you know, I went to pick my son up today from school, and there's another new neighborhood coming up here in the middle of Georgia, and the workers are Mexican. And I've seen this. I've seen them on the roads. You see them in the fields. You see them building the houses. You see them hanging on, you know, doing roofing, everything. And when you go to the markets on the weekends, you see them buying the tools. They've actually become the experienced workers of machinery and stuff. But the indigenous issue is not going to go away. We have to look at the long term. Our future lies in the Americas. I'm here. You know, my parents, my great grandparents. You know, we were at Jamestown. We came from Europe. I love this land. In addition to Mexico being our closest ally in the future, that's where our future lies. We have to have a America-centric immigration policy that will recognize the indigenous Americas, because this issue is not going away. Israel, the Jewish banking system will collapse. WASP rule will collapse. And then what? You know, America's in decline. We know this. You know, since 1980, we've accrued $25 trillion when you count the state and local buying the bonds, all with fractional banking. That's $125,000 a piece if you have 200 million workers in this. And I don't think we do, but if we had to pay our debt off today, it'd be $125,000 for each working man. That's not going to happen, Michael. I mean, I don't want a nuclear war.
No, it can't happen. There's not that much money in existence. That's the trap of private central banking. There's more debt than money with which to pay the debt. There is no way to pay it off other than by shutting down the bank and writing that debt off. I want to go back to your story about seeing all these Mexicans who are working, building houses and everything. Are these individuals here legally? Do they have work permits, or are they here illegally?
Michael, 1/10 of Georgia is now Hispanic. You probably know that. You can
You're
look
not
it up.
answering the question
and
I
probably
asked.
It's a lot more than that.
You didn't answer the question I asked.
Many of them are illegal. Many of them are illegal.
Well,
and
they
you know
be
what?
working.
The American people here are not going to do anything about it. I mean, that's something the government's got to step in. Nobody's going to do anything about it, Michael.
Well, we need the government to step on in here, because we do have almost 100 million Americans who I'm sure would be perfectly fine nailing on shingles and stuff. When I was younger, we had to replace the roof on our house. It's not all that difficult to do. But if these workers are here illegally, employing them is a Title VIII violation. And the biggest problem we have with immigration, we don't need new laws. We need the laws that we already have to be enforced.
Michael, many of us try to keep the basics of our Christian heritage. And Christ was about peace. That's all I can say. And you know, we're not going to take a person that's worked. The Mexican, and I don't want to build up the Mexican too much, but they have worked like a slave, like no other. The hypocrisy coming up from Central America through Mexico is that if they're at the Tijuana border, you know, San Diego's right there, and you've got people from 200 different nations living there that don't belong there. If anybody belongs in San Diego, I mean, let's be honest, it would be the indigenous people that lived there for thousands of years.
Well,
I mean, there's too much hypocrisy going on.
I understand that the United States was subject to invasion by the colonists and subsequent waves, but that doesn't mean we have to accept another invasion on our homes. All countries have a right to defend their borders, and we have a legal immigration process by which anybody from any other country in the world can come to the United States, go through the process, and become a legal citizen. And for those that follow that path, welcome. And I hope we're not too much of a disappointment to you. But there are a lot of legal immigrants right now who are very upset over the current situation. First of all, because they feel they're being lumped together with the illegals. and discriminated against. And second, it's sort of making a mockery of the process they went through to be a legal citizen, to just see the open borders and, hey, we're going to let them in, we're going to give them driver's licenses, we're going to let them vote.
Michael, I have to tell you this. You probably already know this. You know, I grew up in Mason, Ohio. I lived there till I was 21, 22. That town was basically 100% white when I grew up, and I knew no different. It just was what it was. Well, you go back there today, and there's many Muslims. There's a mosque. There's a couple mosques. There's South Asian Indians. There's people from all over the place. You go up to Michigan, you see large Muslim communities. You know,
and
maybe
if they're here legally,
something else, but
if they're here legally, welcome. That's the issue here.
Michael, there's no future. I mean, let's face it. Who signed the Immigration Reform Act? It was Lyndon Johnson, who committed treason several times. I mean, they overthrew a president. All of that should be invalidated. But the Mexican, I am not for giving them citizenship. Don't get me wrong. I'm not for anchor babies or anything, but I'm for giving them work permits, and I'm for realizing that the future lies in an America's, the Western Hemisphere, the land that was stolen from the indigenous peoples. I'm man enough to say we stole it. I mean, we may have said we did it for Christianity or whatever, but I know what we did, and I know that it's being done again. Basically, you're having we're being conquered this time, and it's not going to turn out good. You know,
no,
I see really my lost brothers really out there around the world
okay, Jeff,
trying to cause World War III.
Jeff, okay, we agree to disagree on this topic. I'm for a United States that focuses on the United States. And for anybody who comes here through the legal mean, I don't have a problem with that. What I do have a problem with is this wide open border situation, which is causing a tremendous amount of economic harm to our country. I'll let you go, and we're going to do a shout out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining the network. And let's take another phone call from Steve Elkins. Aloha, Steve. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Steve, are you there?
This guy, he's drinking the Kool-Aid. If you don't like it here, then I suggest he move to Mexico. I'm 100% for America, America only, America first. And this indigenous people, using that lame excuse of indigenous people, well, let's see. We could all move away and go off our land and give it back to the Indians if we want to do that, of the indigenous people. But it's not going to happen. And we tried very hard with the NAFTA to boost their economy so they would have a robust economy, and hopefully people would stay there and work in their own country. But if you have a criminal government, and they have a very corrupt government in Mexico, where they squeeze the wealthy, make all the money, and the people are in poverty, and that's why they're coming here. And I left the state of California, and I'll tell you right now, I blame a lot of the people in California for allowing a lot of problems in California with the illegal immigration by not cutting their own hedges, not cutting their own grass, not painting their own houses, refusing to do any kind of labor on their own homes, and they invited these people. You remove the incentive, and they won't come here. I'm all for a border wall, because every country should have a wall to protect their sovereignty. And I don't know why this guy, Jeffrey, if you're listening still, why do you listen to RBN? You clearly are not on the side of America first. America first. There's no exception. We're not number two. We're number one. So I don't know why this guy's even listening. He called yesterday and spouted off with the Mexico thing again. The indigenous people, we took the land away from them. I'm all for legal immigration. I had a guest on my show a month ago who went through the normal process. I commend that, the normal process. He did it. He's an American citizen now. He's adhering to our culture, our ways, our language, as it should be, like Teddy Roosevelt said.
Yes,
so,
absolutely.
This guy either find another network or whatever. Don't call in anymore, because this is ridiculous.
It really is ridiculous, and so is his indigenous people's argument, because ultimately even the indigenous people were immigrants. They came across that land bridge from Asia during the last great ice age. and migrated down through the Americas. So they're as much immigrants as the rest of us.
Right. Yeah. Well, I'm sorry for spouting off like that. I'm just getting a little irritated when people put others ahead of us who come here illegally. I'm all for legal immigration, like you said. I agree with that. But the indigenous people, we took their land away from them, so we should just now give it all back to them and let them have this and that. Bunk. I'm sorry, it's not going to happen, and I don't condone that. And if he should find another network to listen to, for God's sakes, because he is so brainwashed. I'd like to take a look at this guy to see what his angle is here, because I got a funny suspicion he's got an agenda there.
Well, yeah, obviously there's an agenda there, and I think, again, it's in support of the open border situation. Anyway, Steve, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go and switch over to Curtis in Nevada. Curtis, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, Mike, I want to answer Jeff. I actually agree with him in that going to the Middle East or anywhere else is a no-win proposition for this country. We have to come back and we have to solidify our hemisphere and forget about the Middle East. That's beyond us. That's beyond any human, in my opinion, to be able to solve the problems of, but the point that I'm trying to make is that you cannot allow people. The most important thing about this country is not race or not who was here first. The most important thing about is the idea of the Constitution, the Bill of Rights. See, that's the document that anybody has to consider the most important thing. So if you're white and you've been here all, generations, or you're Hispanic or whatever, and you're coming into this country, if that's not number one, focus in your mind that you want to hold up to, we don't want you. Because, the thing is that human nature is such that all the other populations in the world, that they all have a different way of a mentality. They're mostly all collective minded. And if you run the village, if you're the strongest villager or the dominant personalities, that village is going to be run the way you want it to be. And that's the mentality of the Hispanics. I know. I'm talking firsthand experience. That's the mentality of Asians. In other words,
it's the mentality of everybody. I mean, the Milgram experiment proved that.
Well, yeah, that's what you're saying. The experiment of this Constitution, that's the thing that everybody has to stay behind and rally around. Not we let all these guys come in, and because you know what happens when they get the numbers, they're going to stop trying to assimilate. And we've seen that already, since the mid-'80s. The more Hispanics coming in, they don't care about becoming American.
No, I saw that back in Los Angeles when I lived there.
Understand. You get that. They don't care about it. They just want to get here, right?
Yep.
Yeah. And that's what these guys, but it's kind of ironic how Steve talks about the indigenous people. I mean, it may not be the same, but it's funny how they try to defend the Palestinians and fight for their rights. Aren't they the indigenous people over there?
They very much are.
Right. See, so how can it be that they defend them, but over here it's the opposite way? That's kind of, I don't understand that. You got to be consistent.
I agree with you on that one. All right. Well, Curtis, thank you very much. We're going to let you go and switch over to John in Phoenix. Aloha, John. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I'm a little upset because I'm mentally ill and I rely on government assistance. And these liberals, they try to say that they're out there to help us. Like when they passed the Department of Homeland Security, George Bush passed the Department of Homeland Security, and all the liberals said, "Oh, it's fascist and everything else." And did the liberals get rid of it to give more money to disabled who can't work? No, they use it as an opportunity to hire the first lesbian to run a State Department. Now, I had a friend of mine, one of my best friends. She went to a post office and she was being harassed by a postal worker, and she wouldn't sell her a stamp. And she made a crack about praying for a bomb to fall on her head just because out of frustration. And the whole thing got turned around, and She ended up doing 4 years in prison. And this wasn't something everybody said it was going to be George Bush and his greedy white friends who were going to abuse the anti-terrorist laws. And it turned out to be a Mexican postal worker. And the only satisfaction she got out of it, or any gain she got out of it, was somebody that she didn't like spending 4 years in prison. So I'm sick and tired of all these liberals saying they're out there to help people who are mentally disabled and can't work, and they're actually hurting it because they're wasting money locking people in prison. And because the Department of Homeland Security spied us even more than George Bush did with the Department of Homeland Security. So there was less money to give to disabled because of Barack Obama's policies and all the liberal policies. They're out there trying to say they want to help the disabled, but they're making it worse for us than even George Bush is.
Yeah, that's a big problem here. I mean, there's a certain segment of the homeless population, at least here in Hawaii, that have just been kicked out of the mental health facilities because there's no money. It's all going for the war.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's ridiculous. I wanted to get that off my chest, Mike. Thanks a lot. You keep up the good work. Say hi to Claire for me.
All right, I certainly will. Thank you very much. We're going to go to Joe in Arkansas. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, Mike. This is Joe in Alaska.
Oh, Alaska. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Alaska, I'm sorry.
Yeah, you're talking about immigration, illegal immigration, I assume. Forget about DACA. Back in 2011, I got a rude awakening from my birthday in March there because Fukushima melted down. I was in New York City. And I called around all the pharmacies looking for iodine. I finally went up to the Indian Point nuke plant. I got there a little early. I figured, well, they, among anybody, should have iodine pills. Well, I got there a little early. I went into the cafe, and there's a bunch of Hispanics sitting around talking Spanish. And so it got I had a little bite to eat, and along about 8 o'clock, I went back out and headed back down. Most of them had left already. I got to the supermarket outside the plant, and I thought I'd go in there and check the pharmacy there. And I come back out, all these illegals, I assume that's what they were all hanging out on the sidewalk, and pickup trucks were coming and picking them up.
Yeah, day workers. Day workers.
Well,
all right. Well, listen, I hope you found your potassium iodate, but I'm going to have to let you go for the next commercial break. We'll be back with more phone calls after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. And apparently, Joe up in Alaska wasn't quite finished. So, Joe, go ahead and finish up.
Yeah, Mike, the point is, we know they were falsifying the records at Indian Point nuke plant.
Yes.
And apparently they're also hiring undocumented workers to go in there and clean up their messes. Now, how easy would it be for a terrorist to slip in amongst them, huh? How about that? What do you think?
Very easy.
Yeah. Well, that was the point I wanted to get to. Fukushima has been a real nightmare for me. I live out in Nome, Alaska, and the hair was falling off of the seals and the walrus. And back then, it seems to have ameliorated whatever since then. But all that fallout was laying on the ice and draining down through the seals' breathing holes that spring, and it was real bad. Anyway,
yeah, it was really bad. But you do raise a good point. If you are allowing illegal immigrants, and of course we're assuming they're illegals and that they're not naturalized, but yeah, it would be child's play for somebody to come on in with ill intent, to basically sabotage the primary cooling loop of any nuclear reactor, which would be a big, huge mess to try and deal with. All right, Joe, well, thanks a lot. We're going to let you go, and we're going to move on to Mark in Florida. Aloha, Mark. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Mark,
hey, Mike, thanks for letting me in.
There you are.
I just wanted to comment because I just can't stand picking on people because they're a different color from another country as man-made somehow. But if the U.S. is in, 183 countries?
Something like that.
Raping, pillaging, bombing, beaten to death? All the people in every one of those countries has a right to come here for sanctuary. Because if the U.S. is going to bomb them to death, my God, they got a place to come to, and it's here. Now, when we stop bombing people around the world and ruining their countries, then maybe you might have a claim for illegals and strangers and people you don't like. But until then,
like is not the issue. Like is not the issue. The issue is there is a legal means of immigration to this country. There is a legal means to apply for asylum from these war zones.
Okay, Mike, I'll take that. What's the legal means for the U.S. bombing every other country on the face of the earth?
Well, obviously, the U.S. is acting illegally.
And women, then you might be able to push your prejudice on somebody. But until then,
this is not prejudice. This is not prejudice.
It is prejudice.
Illegal is not a race. Okay, that's the issue here.
Illegal is against the truth. Illegal is a fallacy. Nothing is illegal unless you harm
I disagree with you on that one. Now, the fact of the matter is that the open borders agenda is not being pushed as some kind of apology for the U.S. going around the world and dropping bombs on everybody. It's being pushed by the globalist New World Order agenda. They want to blur everybody together. So we lose our sense of a racial, cultural, regional, historical identity because people who don't have a strong sense of self are easier to manipulate and propagandize. And that's what's behind that open borders issue. We know that the Democrats are using the illegal immigrants to sway elections in their favor, and that is a violation of the law. Now, I don't agree, obviously, with U.S. wars in other countries. I understand it's caused a huge amount of suffering and death. But this nation, the United States, does have a sovereign right to control its borders and to decide who does and does not come on in. Okay?
Well, I look at it as the way the United States robbed, raped, and pillaged the South. They're doing the same thing around the world, and it's all because of prejudice and the color of man's skin. And if you read the laws and the court rulings and the Constitution, white men, it's all based on the color of a man's skin.
No, it's based on greed. It's based on greed.
And that too.
Okay, yeah, let's put things in perspective, okay? All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go and switch over to Andrew in California. Aloha, Andrew. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Mike, to begin with, I'd like to say that some of your callers lately seem a little delusional and don't quite understand what America means. For one, I'd like to get on the immigration thing. I live in California. I've been voting. I'm a 50-year-old white male living in California. I'm definitely a minority here. I worked in the construction trade most of my life, in logging trade most of my life. Now most of these jobs that I go for, they want you to speak Spanish, which is highly unusual to me. I live in America. I need to know Spanish to do a construction job. It's kind of strange.
Yes.
They're all pretty much done by South American or Mexican people. They're pretty much buying all the property here in this state. They're buying farms now. These aren't people that are farm workers anymore. Those days are over.
Okay, Andrew. Andrew, I need to put you on hold. We got to do another commercial break. Don't hang up. I'll come right back to you after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking with Andrew in California. And Andrew, please pick up where you left off.
Let's see. These people do not assimilate. They do not try and become Americans. They don't try and be Americans. They don't try and learn our language. They will take over entire neighborhoods and turn them into little ghettos. There's certain parts of cities you can go into this. Most big cities in California here, you can go and find the Spanish side of town, if you would, and you will see that they've taken over all the businesses in those areas. And the streets basically start looking like Tijuana, Mexico. The garbage on the streets, these people have no problem. I live in the country, and they have no problem driving out into the country from the city and dumping truckloads of garbage right alongside the road, because that's how things work down in Mexico. You just throw your garbage on the road. And they're pretty much trashing the place. The other thing that I noticed is if you go into any of the gardening shops, now they've legalized marijuana here in California for recreational use. And what I'm seeing happen is the cartels have basically moved up here to California now. They no longer have to ship the drugs over the border. They're buying up houses all over in the low-income neighborhoods, and they turn them into pot houses. If you go into any of the gardening shops, you will see them in the gardening shops spending thousands and thousands of dollars on gardening equipment, indoor gardening equipment, grow lights and things like that. None of these people speak English. They all spend cash, and I've been in the gardening shops where the guys will come in there and buy $10,000 to $20,000 worth of gardening equipment right there. So what I can see happening is now no longer the drugs have to come across the border. They can just grow the drugs here. And that, if you go and look at any of the grow shops or any of the what they call marijuana dispensaries, you will see that this is quite prevalent. For some reason, people in America no longer look at facts. It seems like their beliefs are emotion driven.
Yes.
Which creates a very dangerous environment.
Yes, it does.
And unfortunately, that's the world we live in now here in America. And voting doesn't work, obviously. Voting does not work. People in America should, by now, I'm 50 years old. I already know that every election I've ever voted in has been a complete joke. And it didn't matter which candidate we voted in, we basically seem to end up with the same results. I don't know if you believe that same way or not.
Yeah, I do. I do. I mean, we keep voting for the presidents who promise to lower taxes and end the wars. The taxes go up, the wars continue. The American people have become disconnected from their own government. And I'm rather surprised that Donald Trump isn't addressing that situation more sternly, because if he does not get the election system under control, he's going to be a one-term president. Because the election riggers are going to be back working twice as hard in 2020 to get him out there. And my concern is that Hillary Clinton is going to run again, steal the primaries like they did in 2016, and finally get her way into the White House, and that will be a disaster for the entire nation.
Do you really see a difference between Republican candidate or a Democratic candidate? From my experience, they all work for the same corporations, and basically America is a fascist dictatorship at this point in time.
I agree with everything that you're saying, and I don't tend to judge candidates based on their political party, although I do try and avoid liberalism in general. I consider myself a paleocon, but I tend to look at the candidates themselves, which is why I think Tulsi Gabbard has got a lot of good qualities. I mean, obviously, I disagree with her on gun control.
So you still believe in the system somewhat? See, I've given up all belief in that, in our political system whatsoever. I believe that the corporations run any politician. It doesn't matter who it is, and even how small the election is. Actually, I see it in our local elections here. I see it in national elections. That basically we end up with the same results each time, working for the military-industrial complex.
Well, don't forget Israel's influence. You know, Israel's got a lock on government at all levels.
Oh, absolutely. But I also believe that I think that the Russians and the Chinese are in the same game. They see that as long as you can instill fear into your population, you can make lots of money. Lots of money. And I think it all goes to money. And just like you said earlier, all you got to do is follow the money. That's it.
It's all about greed. All right. Well, listen, thank you very much, Andrew.
Thank you very much, Michael.
We're going to let you go and switch over to Byron in Canada. Aloha, Byron. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, no, I was just listening to some of your callers, and the one guy that was going on, I'm American, I'm, American way of life. And, that's good. I kind of like people that want to put their country first. But, why don't you ever stop and think about when you got a government that goes and kills its own damn people and then try to pin it on other countries so they can go to war over there and slaughter the people? I just seen some pictures of some Iraqi babies where the good old U.S. of A. dropped those those shells, those uranium shells.
Depleted uranium shells, yeah, and it's caused a
the
huge
radiation,
crisis in severe birth abnormalities among the Iraqi people and also among our returning veterans who were exposed to that stuff. That's a big, deep, dark secret that the Iraqi veterans have had a way out of normal experience of severe birth abnormalities. They go over, they fight the war, they get exposed to depleted uranium munitions, they come back, they get married, they're starting a family, and then this happens.
Yeah, I'm just saying that guy's so proud to be an American, you know. He ought to pull his head out of his ass and go see what, you know, the Americans are doing, not only to their own people here in the United States, but around the world there. The other thing I was going to say, I seen John McCain. I guess his cancer.
Well, before you move on to John McCain here, I want to clarify something. I'm proud to be an American, and I'm proud of the American people, but I obviously have a serious disagreement with the way the government is running this country.
Well, like I said, you know, they can complain about the Mexicans coming to the United States. Well, I guarantee you, yeah, they probably are doing some harm to this country, but they ain't doing nothing compared to what the Americans are doing to the countries that they're going into. And I tell you what, they sure to hell wasn't invited.
No.
They go in there and just destroy the goddamn countries like, typical U.S. bullshit. Anyway, I'm going to get off here.
Okay, got to watch your language on this radio. We've got on-air affiliates that, you know, the FCC is looking for an excuse to shut us all down, so please control the language.
All right, I apologize, but I get sick and tired when I hear these guys. I'm an American. Anyway, that's all. Bye.
All right, well, Byron, we're going to let you go here and get on back to the news. You're probably already aware of all these DNA companies. You see them advertising on TV all the time, where you send in a little tube of your spit, and they'll come back and tell you what your ancestry is. And in the case of 23andMe, they'll also send back some medical things like, you know, your DNA says you actually died 5 years ago or something like that. There is a problem with the accuracy of the analysis, but what these companies are doing are building a huge DNA database of the American people. Now, sometimes it can be put to good use because apparently they used a DNA match to identify the suspect in the East Area rapist case out in California. It was also called the Golden State Killer. And Ancestry and 23andMe are saying they're not the source of the genetic analysis that led Sacramento County deputies to arrest Joseph James DeAngelo as the East Area rapist. But these companies are building these huge DNA databases, which, if they're served with a warrant, they will provide that information to law enforcement. So there are two ways of dealing with your concerns about privacy. Don't use the DNA testing services, and then they're not really accurate. Or if you do use a DNA testing service, don't go on out and become a rapist. Okay? Those are the only two solutions here. Very interesting story. This is from Sputnik News. And it tells the story of this Norwegian executive who was arrested in Russia and expelled from the country for a decade over suspicions of espionage. And this executive has now come on out and saying that Norway's intelligence service has a habit of recruiting businessmen to become informants in Russia, which is obviously going to have a negative effect on bilateral relations. And I'm sure Norway's not the only country to do this. I remember many, many years ago, one of the first SIGGRAPHs I went to when I was in the computer animation business, and it was the first SIGGRAPH that a delegation from Russia had been allowed to attend. And they were way, way behind in the technology, but I spent some time at their table. We were talking about things, and I walk away, and this very shady-looking guy comes on up and says, "What did you get from them?" And so we were talking about Bressingham's algorithm, and he takes out his little notepad and he starts writing down all this stuff about, you know, what the Russians are doing with Bressingham's algorithm, which is nonsense because if you have a textbook on computer graphics, computer animation, it's in there. So a lot of spying going on here. Down in Florida, the police union is basically responding to the Parkland shooting. Apparently, more than 500 deputies in Florida have voted They no longer have any confidence in the sheriff who presided over the Valentine's Day shooting at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School. Yeah, I'd say probably you wouldn't, looking at how that got messed. Over in East Milwaukee, there are 2 police officers who broke down a mentally ill man criminally charged, according to Milwaukee County District Attorney John Chisholm. That is another problem we're dealing with in this country, that the police abuse and incompetence is on full display. In fact, we just put up a story at whatreallyhappened.com about this woman who spent a year in jail because a police officer looked at her vitamin pills and thought they were OxyContin. And he did a field test, which came up with a false positive, and it took the police lab a year before they retested the pills and said, these are just vitamins. And then they released her and said, sorry, our bad. Over in Baltimore, held up as one of the model cities for gun control, they've had 33 murders in the last 30 days. It's amazing. Okay, over at Yale University, they did a study of FDA-approved drugs and discovered that 1/3 of all FDA-approved drugs have new safety issues detected after approval. In other words, the FDA is approving drugs that should not have been approved, that have problems with them. But it's all about making the money, 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 money. Got to keep those pharmaceutical corporations happy here. Here's another story. This one came out of Natural News. And somebody did a study around the world looking at autism rates versus vaccination rates, and to nobody's surprise, they did confirm that the higher the vaccination rate, the more autism is going to be found in that population. And there's definitely an issue there, but the vaccines are big business. We can't let anything get in the way of the profits, and the pharmaceutical companies are basically looking at this issue. They can't admit their drugs were causing autism, or there'd be massive lawsuits. They can't even change the formulation of the vaccines because that will be seen as an admission that they know there's a problem. So they're just toughing it out. They're hiring public relations firms and they're exerting political pressure to keep this issue under cover, while lobbying governments to make more and more vaccines mandatory. One of the biggest peddlers of vaccines is the CDC itself, which has patents on some 20, 30 vaccines that it in turn sells. They're not impartial in this debate. Now, there was a recent lawsuit fought by the Tarsal family on behalf of their daughter, Christina, who died from an arrhythmia induced by an autoimmune response to Gardasil. And they fought the U.S. government for 8 years on this, but the final ruling has been confirmed by the Department of Health and Human Services. Merck's Gardasil vaccine causes autoimmune problems that cause sudden debilitation and or death. If the young girl had been gunned down by a madman with an AR-15, there'd be national headlines and a march on Washington. But this woman was shot to death by a vaccine, so the whole story gets swept under the rug. And it's looking more and more like Gardasil is one of the most damaging vaccines out there. Now, Vice President Mike Pence, older brother, Greg, who's now running for Congress in Indiana's 6th district, says that the Second Amendment exists to protect us from the government, and he is absolutely right. And he says, I don't want the federal government telling me what guns I can have and can't have. I don't want them telling states what the definition of possession is. I'm an absolute, adamant supporter of the Second Amendment for the purpose of protecting us from the government, which is exactly why the Founding Fathers gave us that Second Amendment. It's not about hunting. It's not about target shooting. When the Constitution and the Bill of Rights were being written, hunting was an absolutely essential part of life in the colonies. You hunted during the winter to put food on the table. You target shot to maintain your proficiency. The Second Amendment is all about military arms to hold off abusive government. That's why they talk about the security of a free state, meaning the individual separate states being safe from tyranny from the central government. That's what it exists for. Now, here's another story about the indoctrination that we're seeing in our schools. Apparently, over in New Jersey, Lacey Township School District suspended 2 high school students over Snapchat pictures showing them at a gun range outside of school hours. That's it. These students went to school. School was over. They went to the gun range. They were shooting safely. And they got suspended. And there may be a lawsuit involved because it was obviously a serious violation of their rights. Now, when Macron was visiting with President Bush, he made a nod to global warming, which, by the way, they're already blaming global warming for the floods we had on Kauai. And he made this comment, there is no planet B for us to go to, which prompted a Twitter storm saying, please stop bombing planet A. We'll be right back after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Now, last November 15th, they had a large earthquake in South Korea, the second most damaging in all their history. And the quake hit the southeastern city of Pohang, injuring nearly 100 people, temporarily leaving 1,500 homeless, causing millions in damage. Scientists have now concluded that the earthquake was caused by an experimental fracking plant injecting water deep underground, which we know has been an issue all along. We know that Oklahoma, prior to the fracking boom, had no history of quakes. Now they get them all the time. Now, over in Japan, the country's environment ministry it has proposed a plan of using radiation-tainted material from Fukushima to build a number of roads in the region. And obviously, residents are very concerned about possible poisoning of the soil. Authorities are trying to convince people it will be safe, saying the radioactive soil will be buried underneath clean soil that will block any harmful radiation. Well, the alpha and beta, yeah. The gamma, not so much. The real issue is what happens when the roads begin to deteriorate. And I speak from experience here, having to drive on Hawaii's deteriorated roads. There will be potholes that open up. There'll be rain that will get into the soil and start leaching these radioactive materials out. I think it's a bad idea. What Japan is trying to do is just take the contaminated radioactive soil and sort of spread it around so it's not as much of an eyesore or concern. Now, the European Union member states have decided on an outdoor ban on neonicotinoid relapse disorder. They don't know everything that's causing it, but these pesticides have been identified as one of the issues, one of the threats to the bees. And bees are an essential part of the food chain. If we don't have those little pollinators, then farm plants don't get pollinated. Now, these pesticides are going to be allowed to be used inside greenhouses, where presumably bees will not be able to get at them. But they're making some progress on that one. I still have a concern over GMO pollen being harmful to bees. And that's based on an article that came out some years ago that identified GMO pollen as the reason for the decline in the monarch butterflies, which, by the way, are finally starting to show signs of coming back, at least around here. And finally, last comment before the show, the University of Texas is now going to treat masculinity as a mental health issue. In other words, if you're a manly man, there must be something wrong with you. Well, I don't think so. Real men don't have mental health issues. All right, there's the music. Time for me to get on out of here. I got to do the Jim Goddard show up in Vancouver. Stay tuned for John Stadmiller. I'm sure he's got lots of amazing things to share with you, and we'll be back tomorrow. Please share everything that you learn here with everybody that you know. Use email, face-to-face conversation. Don't bother with social media. It's now totally filtered. It's a complete waste of time. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.